Well, greetings everyone, and welcome once again to another Thursday night right here on the Sports Crib. Uh, hey, it's just a couple more weeks until the game gets started for real. Right now on ESPN, you can watch another preseason game. I believe it's the Bears and the Seahawks. And Hey, it's what September 18th is just right around the corner, less than well, exactly 1 month away. But hey, let's get all of the commercials out of the way. I'm James E. King III, better known as West Coast Steeler fan. You can subscribe and donate to us right here on our channel. And as you can see, our Cash App is JE King 3. So, with all the commercials out of the way, let's get the program on the road. I see Mr. Carroll is right here already. How you doing there, Bill?
So far, so good. I hope everything's going well with you too.
Oh yeah, the weather out here in Southern California is all that. You know, all that they put out there on the posters. So yeah, it's very good. How are things up there in Chicagoland?
Yeah, so obviously, this is a game day here in Chicago. Well, not here in Chicago. I guess it's an away game, but obviously, there's a lot of trepidation about what is going on with the team, and what who will be left when it's all said and done. I told anyone who would listen that I really believe that they were planning to completely remake the roster, and that's what they're doing. They're completely remaking the roster. It is
Well,
you will not recognize most of the names on this team soon.
you know, I have somewhat of a dilemma there because, and I know this is way too early for fantasy football. But is David Montgomery a viable fantasy pick this year?
I mean, once again, I play a lot of Dynasty. I've been off Montgomery for a while. I think Khalil Herbert is the present, but they think he's the future. So I guess they'll go with him for a little while longer. But I am a not a fan, particularly of. I mean, let me put it differently. I don't dislike Khalil Herbert. I just think there's nothing particularly special. I mean, I don't dislike. I like Herbert. I don't dislike um, Montgomery. I don't think there's anything special about him. I think he is average in a lot of different ways. So yeah.
I got a trade offer today. David Montgomery for Cam Akers, and I jumped all over it.
Yes, you were right.
I mean, it
He's
wasn't
in a
even
better
said.
offense. He's, I think, a year younger. I mean, there's a bunch of reasons I can think of. Faster, better receiver of the football. I mean, yeah, there's a litany of reasons, but yes, choose one of them.
All right. Well, um, right here in San Diego, little drama. We had talked about what happened. Small market team like excuse me, San Diego getting a guy like Soto. Now we find that our young hope, Mr. Tatis, is being suspended for 80
A
games.
bad haircut. Christ.
Yeah,
Yes, correct.
yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I mean, I thought it was fine. Just didn't wash with MLB, but
Nope.
now,
Um,
and when I look at what's been happening this year, we've seen a few young players that have been suspended. Maybe not as as well known as Tatis, and probably for not. Well, I don't think there's any for 80 games, but you know, I start looking back at some of the things that and marijuana, and when before it was legal, you had all these different people trying different types of masks, drink a cup of vinegar before, all the different types of things, that went through. And then we've had in boxing. guys suspended, not because they necessarily found a PED in their body, but because they found a masking agent in their body. Why would you use a masking agent if
Right, unless you just, I'm just doing like you have a YouTube channel where you do nothing but try different masking agents.
Yeah.
Short of that, it'd be difficult to explain. Yes.
So do you think that perhaps with all of the chemistry that's involved, that perhaps there's more rampant use? I'm not going to say we're back in the Sammy Sosa era, but do you think that there's probably more rampant use of these PEDs than we think, especially when you look at the way the ball is jumping out of some of these stadiums?
Well, I mean, the ball's jumping out, at least in part. I think I said this before. The stadiums are juiced, right? I mean, by the time I was a small child, the Polo Grounds, they're moving on from those ballparks where you might be 420 something in the power alleys. Those days are long gone, James.
No.
I mean, there were stadiums around that were 460 plus to deep center in the old days, and there's nothing like that anymore. I
remember when the Green Monster used to be the exception.
Right. That 314 feet, right? All that stuff. That was right. That was like a cool, wacky thing, and now everybody's got a short porch somewhere. So that's one thing. They've juiced the ballparks, and when you add to that the and I'm not implying steroid use, just the athletes themselves are very different types of athletes. We talked about this. Watch the Yankees just take the field and remind yourself that they've got one guy who's 270 plus, in fact, 280 plus, apparently. They've got another guy who's above 260, several guys above 235. I think the smallest guy in their starting lineup is right around 195, and he looks like a toothpick next to the rest of the team. It looks like a football team, James. So, and a bunch of them were football players. I mean, we talked about this. Aaron Judge almost went, Michigan and Stanford were coming after him heavy to play tight end for them. So, Giancarlo was a good football player in high school. There's a bunch of huge dudes on that team. And, I don't know if they're the biggest team in the league. They should be. If they're not, good God. But there's a bunch of big dudes, huge dudes playing. We used to marvel at Willie McCovey. Oh my God, Willie McCovey, 6'5" and 230 something pounds. Remember that? People used to stand there and gawk at him. And Howard, right? Frank Howard. People were like, oh my God, he's the biggest thing in the world. Ted Kluszewski had to use to cut the sleeves off his uniforms because his arms wouldn't fit. Right? He was 215 pounds, James. And he was huge, right? So that's another thing. So when I say the players, I'm not implying that they're on steroids, but they're juiced in that they look physically quite good.
How much did Louis Aparicio weigh?
Oh, little Louis Aparicio was generously listed at 167.
Yeah.
I don't know if he actually weighed that.
remember those little guys?
Freddie Patek was 142, James. I mean, I remember I had a Freddie Patek card, baseball card, and I was, probably 10, 11 years old. I was like, yeah, I could do this, right? Football, I love football, but I'm not so sure I could do that. But this, I'm going to be bigger than this guy, right? So it's a very different sport. I mean, remember when shortstops, remember when a big shortstop was Robin Yount?
Yeah.
Who towards the end of his career was about 187 pounds. That was a big shortstop at one point, James. 6 feet, 187. Look at him, strapping. 187. I mean, utility infielders are 205. It's a completely different game when it comes to the physical, what's going on with these guys physically. They eat differently. They lift all year round. I mean, football players started lifting seriously in the early 70s. Baseball was lagging behind. I remember one of the first guys to really be a serious weightlifter was a kid named Pink Incaviglia, right? Inky is going, Pink Incaviglia. And he's, once again, a guy that grew up in Texas, played football growing up. and was one of the first guys to like have a serious workout program. Guys were like against it, right? Some of his coaches were like, I don't know about this weightlifting stuff. So it really took baseball until about a little over 30 years ago to really embrace weightlifting. So it's been a really relatively recent revolution, of 30-ish years when you've seen, I mean, obviously Mark McGwire, I mean, that bunch, right? But before, you don't have to go much before then, and you'd still see guys that look like a tub of goo, to quote David Letterman. Like, you don't see, occasionally you'll see a guy, the Kung Fu Panda or whatever, you'll see a chubby guy, but I mean, baseball used to be chock full of guys that looked like they were, like they had maybe like a lawn service or something. Like, it didn't look like, you know what I mean? Baseball used to still have a fair number of guys that didn't really like professional athletes. I remember when Wally Joyner, when he came up? And Wally Joyner's build said, I work in an office, I play some tennis or squash occasionally, but I'm not an athlete. I mean, Wally Joyner was about 185, 190 pounds, but had a bit of a gut. Like, he wasn't that big, but he was like skinny fat, right? He was a decent hitter, but he had, I mean, I'm sure I have more muscle fiber in like my shoulders and arms now in my early 50s than Wally Joyner in his prime. And he was a good player, but he didn't look like he picked up a weight in his life, James. And that wasn't that long ago. So that's the other thing. You're seeing these football bodies all over the place. Trout, right? I mean, he was compared a lot to guys like Mickey Mantle. Mickey Mantle in his prime was 195. Trout's 230, right? So that's the thing, right? The guy who reminds us of Mickey Mantle is 35 pounds heavier than Mickey Mantle, right? So the game has completely changed in those ways, right? The nutrition and weight training is completely revolutionized this sport, as it did other sports, but just got here, like I said, later than some other sports. And parks are smaller than ever before. The average size of a ballpark is down something like 22.5% over 1980. You know what I mean? So you add those two things together, the average park is almost a quarter, almost slightly over 3/4 the size of the average park 40-something years ago, 42 years ago. And the players are bigger and stronger. You don't need to be taking steroids or doing anything else. Just be a bigger dude in a smaller park.
Yeah, it's remarkable now how you look at a lot of ballparks, and center field is now like I know here at Padres Park, it's like a little kids park. The parents take their kids out there, and that's the way they moved in the fences from center field. And like I said, it's kind of ingenious. If it wasn't the bullpen or whatever, but yeah, some of those ballparks have definitely disappeared. Even Wrigley Field, has had modifications to make it
right, and none of them have been getting bigger. Right, they've been making modifications to get smaller.
yeah, the guys are getting bigger.
Guys get bigger, the parks get smaller. So you don't have to do anything with baseball; just keep shrinking the parks.
Yeah, that's pretty much true. I had been going through. Go ahead.
I was going to say real quick. There was a time when the average, you said the average deep center now is something like barely over 400. There was a time when the average deep center was like 420 something.
At least 418.
Right. 421 was the average not that long ago, James. And to like left center, the average would be like 406, or like the smallest, a tiny ballpark at one point, the little parks to the power alleys would still be 380. And that was the smaller parks at not that long ago. Now it's hard to find a park that's 380 some of them are 360, 355 to the power alleys.
Yeah.
I mean, power alley, even the right term, if you only got to hit 355 feet.
Yeah, most definitely. Like you said, I remember that, those 400 footers, and like, hey, now guys are hitting them out, in the lake.
In Minneapolis, all those parks were just cavernous compared to what people are hitting in now.
Yeah. you depended upon your center fielder had to have speed, and but hey, uh, qualifications are different. Like you said, things are speed does make up for it, but your ballparks are also getting smaller. Um, Bill, the NBA has decided that it was going to cancel all games on election day to encourage voting. We've had some criticisms, for the NBA from, shut up and dribble to, uh, you know, uh, millionaires shouldn't be, concerned about these things. But, last week we were talking about the NBA and its record as far as employment, minorities, and women's rights. You know, do I sound like a broken record when I keep asking why is the NBA so much ahead of all of these other sports when it comes
Sure.
to social uh, recognition?
I a lot of the same things I said before, but I'll try to come up with some slightly different things from the last time you asked. So, I mean, though it's not cheap, it's still a little cheaper, and that opens it up to some people who are a little less. What's the word I'm looking for? I mean, they're still very, very rich. Don't get me wrong, very rich, but they're not like the same kind of plutocrats that are talking about to own an NFL franchise, right? They're like a guy like Mark Cuban, who's very rich. Don't get me wrong, but he's not NFL ownership rich. You know what I mean? Like guys like Stan Kroenke and Jerry Jones could buy and sell a guy like Mark Cuban. It sounds funny to say that, but I mean about a guy who has hundreds of millions of dollars, of course, but he's not NFL rich. He's NBA rich, and there's a difference. So there's a slightly younger and slightly more liberal group of owners. That's part of it, right? We talked about the hiring practices. It's a more diverse league in the front office, significantly more diverse than the NBA. I mean, than the NBA is then. Well, I won't bring up hockey because that's not a fair fight. I'll just keep it to baseball and football. Sorry, hockey. You're only about 60 years behind, so catch up. They got their first black GM though, and he's the brother of the GM of the Dolphins, right? Chris Gear's brother is the NHL's first black GM. But good job. You're getting there, NHL. But back to your question. So it's a slightly more diverse, slightly younger, and slightly more liberal ownership group. One thing. And yes, a much more diverse front office group. I mean, they're killing them. Baseball and football when it comes to this. They're way ahead, way ahead when it comes to that. And so because of that, they care more about these kinds of things, at least perception-wise, they care more about these kinds of things. And last but not least, player empowerment. The players are more politically savvy, more involved, and frankly, just way more influential, to be perfectly honest, than players in much more than football and slightly even more than baseball. Like baseball has a very strong union, but they're not so politically plugged in, right? There was a handful of baseball players that kneeled. I mean, literally a handful. Like you could count them on one hand. You didn't see remember the Heat? Was it the Heat that all came out with jerseys, like official Heat gear that said "We can't breathe"? I mean, you would never see that in baseball. And I mean, we saw what happened to a guy who just kneeled in football. So it's a very different place. I mean, the Heat as a team came out with I Can't Breathe logo on their team stuff, right? Official team stuff.
I remember that.
And that would be unthinkable in baseball. And like I said, it would get you, probably end your career in football. So it's very different, James. So you take the more empowered, more politically savvy players, you add that to the more diverse and younger group of owners and the way more diverse and I would say slightly more liberal group of front office personnel, and it's a semi-perfect storm.
Yeah, like I said, the more you read into the NBA, it does seem like that they are. Uh, I don't know if we want to say ahead of the curve, but at least they do seem to be uh, in step with the modern times. Anyway, I'll put it like that. LeBron finally signed his 2-year, 97.1 with player options with uh, the Lakers. And do you think that this is just the first of these short-term deals that he'll do until Bronny hits the league? And
Well,
well, go ahead.
I was
Let's
just
start with
saying, I
that.
mean, long term. I mean, what's a long term deal when you're this old? I mean, I mean, would you sign him to more than 2 years? I wouldn't. I mean, he's a terrific player still, but we've said this how many times? Father Time is what? Undefeated. At some point, LeBron, I don't think LeBron's going to start just sucking at basketball. What I think's going to happen, he's going to get, okay, it'll be plantar fasciitis. Then it'll be a hamstring. Then it'll be, God willing, not an Achilles. But like when you get to a certain point in your career, even if you've been very good, and he's very good about taking care of his body, he's fantastic about taking care of his body, in fact. But I mean, just he's not a quarterback in the NFL. He's not a pitcher or pitchers put a lot of strain on their arm and shoulder area. I'm trying to think of he's not a first baseman or a DH in baseball, right? He's not playing a sport where your body isn't taking a constant pounding. The big thing in baseball is like to travel and they'll just sort of grind, right? It's that, I mean, guys get hurt in baseball too, but it's use injuries. You're doing the same repetitive motions over and over and over again. And that's how guys get hurt. Generally, occasionally you have traumatic injury. Mostly it's usage injuries. But there's still impact injuries. Even though it's not impact from the other guy's body, it's impact from your own body. And we've talked about this when we've talked about Zion Williamson, right? That physics still exists. And if you're going to be whatever it is he weighs now, and I heard he's getting in better shape, which is good. But still, he's never going to be slender. I mean, like that's out of the question. But if he works hard, he drops some more weight, I think it would help him take some of that strain off his joints. I mean, if LeBron wants to do an extension of a year or two, I'm all for it. But there's only so many more good years left in his body, James. I mean, and he's great as he's taking care of himself. I mean, this is 2022. Right? He's been in the league a long time. And, and there's older guys in the league, but some of those guys played a couple of years of college. He's played a lot of basketball because you play way more games in the NBA than you play in college. And then there's more travel and it's a higher level of physical intensity. So LeBron has played a lot. And then you throw the playoffs on top of it. LeBron has played a lot of basketball, James. And at some point, it catches up with you.
He's also made a lot of money, Bill.
Yeah,
I was looking at it today. $560 million. That's $500 million.
it is. And he's
Plus.
30, and he's 37, and he's got a couple more years left in him. And he's someone to play with Bronny, and Bronny's off to college now. I guess he's at college right now. But 1,366 games. That's a lot of games, right? That's a lot of games. 1,366 games are a lot of games. And though he's in fantastic shape, he's 37. He will turn 38 during next season, right? And wait, no, he'll turn 38 before next season, right? Hold on, let me do some math here. Okay, he's 37 now. Right, he turns 30. Yeah, he turns 38. I guess during this next season, right? Early in the next season, he turns 38. He probably has. I'll be, like I said, maybe 2 more good years left, possibly 3, but he'll have to play fewer minutes, and that's been part of the attraction of LeBron James is, how many minutes he plays. But I don't think he's going to be able to continue to do that, James. You can't play 80% of the minutes anymore. You might need to play 2/3, right? He might need to play 70%, maybe. And of course, we talk about load management. And that helps. That has helped him. But load management by itself doesn't make you younger, James. I wish it did. I really wish it did, because then I'd be doing that. I would take more days off work if it actually could make you younger. I'm only coming in like Wednesdays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. I won't be here Mondays and Fridays. Load management.
Hey, in France, you would probably get away with that 4-day work week over there. But
Yep.
from a 90-day work week to a 4-day work week, I was born a little too late. But Bill, another thing that you're talking about load management and whatnot. Now supposedly the new coach Ham has gotten permission to set Westbrook, if he sees fit. So if you have a 38-year-old LeBron, who's possibly, like you said, I mean, that there are going to be games when that just that old age kind of sets in. You have a rather brittle AD, and you have an erratic Westbrook. What are the expectations for the Lakers this season?
I mean, I'm not terribly optimistic. I mean, I'm an optimistic person by nature, James, but I also have some common sense. They need to make at least 2 more roster moves, and the problem is how, right? They do not have a lot of now. There's no hard salary cap in basketball, but at some point that luxury tax bites you. And I don't know if they care about that, but if they do, they've got some work to do.
Well, the Golden State Warriors don't seem to care about it, but it seems like
the Golden State Warriors unloaded a fair amount of salary. They're not a cheap team, but they're a cheaper team than they were a couple of years ago. Now they soon will have a decision to make about Draymond. That's the next big decision, is what they're going to do about Draymond. Because if he wants a max deal, they're going to have to let him go. So he has to decide if he wants to be team friendly and retire there, or if he wants to try to get max money and go someplace else. But by bringing in guys like Wiggins, and I mean, he's not cheap, but he's a bargain by today's NBA standards. And some of the other guys they've brought in are cheaper than some of the guys who left. I mean, KD, I'm sure you've heard, not an inexpensive piece. I mean, it's great to have him, but Wiggins is way cheaper than a guy like KD, James.
Well, see, I mean, to me, even we talk about Draymond, and I'm a Draymond guy. But if I have to make a choice between Wiggins and Draymond, I'm sorry, but Draymond has to go. Wiggins, we got a few more years, but then again, we talk about this, but Draymond has 2 more years on his contract, so we're not, I mean, he can talk, kind of like KD, but
Yep.
whether the team lets him want to walk or not, that's on them. But let's talk about KD because, first there was rumors, well, hey, after I talked to Mr. Sy and told him that the general manager or Steve Kerr had to go, then the next rumors that came out, well, KD is going to retire if the Nets don't trade him. But KD denies the retirement rumors and says that this shit is comical at this point. But what happened? But what happened to the KD that just wants to play ball? That KD that the same one that went to Golden State to win a championship to help those guys out, even after they came all the way across country to recruiting. But I just want to play ball. I want to win. What happened to that KD?
So, I mean, he's a complex character. We've talked about him a lot on this show. And he went from being a very quiet, shy, retiring personality very early in his career. He some of the most boring interviews you'd ever want to see right at the beginning of his career. And I think 2 things happened. One, his experience in Oklahoma. And things about a team like Oklahoma City, it's a soft media market in that it's not. They aren't coming for your throat, right? I mean, it's usually if you're a good player and you play hard, they're not going to be like piranhas, right? You're going to be able to get through a press conference, pretty much undamaged. But as he left Oklahoma City, he went into media markets where a little less forgiving. And he created some of this for himself. He is a guy that's very attuned, I think that's how I'll put it, to what's being said about him. He pays a lot of attention to things like that. We all know the whole thing about his various burner accounts, but the real thing is that he really does care about what's thought and what's said. So at this point in his career, I know he's not quite as old as the aforementioned LeBron. He's not exactly young either. And luckily his game isn't entirely built around explosiveness. He's more like a supersized Reggie Miller than he is like, Kobe or, Grant Hill or Michael or things like that. Like he can move, but he doesn't, because of his length and because of how varied his offensive game is, he doesn't have to be the fastest or be able to jump super high or things like that. I think where you'll see a bit of decline is on the defensive end, right? We often don't realize or don't remember to talk about that when we talk about certain players, that when you start to be, you lose that half a step, you lose a little quickness, you lose a little flexibility, you don't change direction quite as quickly as you did a couple of years back. That's when you get cooked, right? That's when guys, once again, I'll go back to Andrew Wiggins, a very young player. He got matched on some guys who are supposed to be good defenders and really are good defenders, but they were older guys. And when he just showed up and was just this freak athlete, which is what he's always been, but now he started to polish his game up some. He was trouble, James. Like I hate to keep coming back to Andrew Wiggins, but guys like him, it doesn't have to be him necessarily, but those long but super quick, explosive wing guys that everybody's looking for now. Even if you're a great defender, once you get in your mid-30s, James, it's hard to keep up with those guys. Darn near impossible. So I guess the last thing is KD's going to just play ball, right? I mean, he's just reached a point in his career where everybody wants to ask him questions, and sometimes he does want to answer questions. Sometimes he does want to get his thoughts and his takes out there. Like I said, he's a guy that cares a lot about what's said. A lot.
Since you keep talking about Mr. Wiggins, Mark Cuban said that he credited Andrew Wiggins for the Warriors versus Mavericks trouncing. Was this the series that Wiggins had his coming out party?
I would say definitely this whole season to some extent, but yes, definitely the playoffs. He was doing these things all season, James. The playoffs where people paid attention to him doing these things. Oh, he's a much better defender than when he first came in the league. Yes, he's clearly worked on that. Oh, he's got a dribble drive, he can pull-up jumper. He's got a decent turnaround jumper. He's got a bunch of different kinds of layups. He can finish with either hand. He's still not an amazing three-point shooter, but he plays for the Warriors, so there's people for that. I mean, that and passing is probably the two real areas of growth still left in his game, but he's got a lot in his game, James. There's a lot there. And it's not new. Like, he's been good for a little while, but he's in a much better situation than he's been in before. He's getting better coaching. He's surrounded by better teammates. And he can just go out and do – I mean, no one's thinking, oh, here comes the savior of our franchise, right? No one's putting that pressure on him. He can just go out – speaking of going out and playing, that's all he has to do is go out and play. He's a very talented player.
Yeah, he's definitely proved that. NBC Sports put together a list of the top 20 players, and they had the 76ers, Joel Embid. He was ranked 5th behind Jokic, number 4. Jokic, excuse me. What do you think of that ranking? Do you rank Jokic ahead of Embiid?
That's an interesting question. I mean, Embiid is a true old school. You know, he could have hung around and played with guys like Nate Thurman and, Artis Gilmore and Daryl the Axe Imhoff and Swin Nader. He would have been okay with those guys. He could have hung. He's a traditional, true traditional big man. And in Jokic, I mean, he's a fascinating player. He's not a really athletic player, but super off the charts basketball IQ, tremendous passer, one of the best passing big men I've ever seen. Can handle the ball a little bit. Very obviously an excellent shooter. He's just a different kind of player. I mean, you could literally have both those guys on your team and play them both. They could be on the floor at the same time, right? Because Jokic is a facilitator. I mean, you could literally have some beautiful post-entry passing seminar, basically. Those guys were on the same team, with what Jokic can do as a passer, and then you combine that with what Cross can do that would be great. And so in a guy like Embid, and he's worked on his game too. He's a better defender than when we first came out. He can finish with either hand now at a pretty high level. His jumper has come along. So, I mean, he's a well-rounded player, but he's not Jokic, who is basically a giant point guard out there, the world's largest point guard. And when he does face like dominant scoring big men down low, does he struggle? Yes. He's not very athletic. He's, above average strength, but below average in pretty much everything else you can measure physically. All of that stuff is not great, but the physics he's got. I mean, what do you call it? Jokic is very European. I mean, obviously he's European, but like the way he plays is the exemplary way a European big man plays, right? He does rebound, gets the ball out on the break at a high level, can dribble reasonably well for a guy his size, though he's not super athletic. He's not going to dribble rings around you. He can dribble a little bit. I mean, he's a well-rounded player. I think there's a place for both of them, even on the same team. But Jokic is the kind of guy that can have a greater impact on every part of the team because of how good a passer he is.
It's an interesting comparison. Like you said, 4 or 5. And that probably would be a very interesting pairing if that would ever happen. But hey, maybe you hit on something that'll happen later on down the line. But speaking of the 76ers, HoopsHype has the Moses Malone free agent signing as the best free agent signing in the history of the 76ers. I think wasn't Dr. J a part of this team that Moses joined?
Right, but I think that might have been a little something different. I'm trying to remember if they did a dispersal draft when the ABA folded. How are those players apportioned? I'm trying to remember if they did a dispersal draft, because that, I guess technically speaking, he's not a free agent signing if they get him through a dispersal draft. Just like a guy who's in the Rule 5 draft in baseball, even though he might have been on a major league roster for a hot second. Once if you don't have too much service time in, you can go back into the Rule 5 draft. I don't know if you want to talk about Rule 5 draft, but the point is that I don't know if he counts as a free agent signing. I'd have to double check, because he may have been essentially given to them or whatever in a dispersal draft when the ABA.
No, I don't think that was the case in Moses.
Oh, you no Moses. I know Moses' story. I told you he came to our school. He came to Norfolk State from Petersburg. He's from Petersburg, Virginia, and at one point, I think it was just for appearance's sake or something. But at one point, he showed up at a couple of college campuses, including ours in Norfolk State. None of us. I mean, we're excited, but none of us there felt like we had any chance for Moses to actually come. So he was just in the normal draft and was drafted, as a player, and just the youngest player. I think he might still be the youngest. Only one of the youngest players ever drafted, because he was 17 and change. Wasn't even 18, if Maurice serves it correctly.
Brandon Jennings accuses LeBron and CP3 of running the NBA, of turning the NBA, into a players' league. But wasn't the NBA a players' league before CP3 and LeBron. I mean, but maybe because of the the enormity of the salaries nowadays, it gets more attention. But I mean, the NBA was one of the ones to come up with actually guaranteed salaries that were actually guaranteed.
Yeah, so it's been a players' league for a while, like you said. So I actually had to cheat and look it up. So he was in a dispersal draft. I'm talking about Dr. J, but it was
I was okay. Okay, yeah,
well, you brought up Dr. J. So
yeah.
but they supported.
I thought at some time they were teammates. That's why I brought it up.
Oh, they were teammates. That was years later. So remember okay. So I as you know, he was a member of the Virginia Squires, and that's the first time I ever saw Dr. J because he played in my hometown, right, in Norfolk, Virginia. And the first time I saw him, he and George Gervin, in fact, were both Virginia Squires till the ABA and its infinite wisdom decided they couldn't have both of those young studs on the same team. It wasn't good for the league, blah, blah, blah. So they forced them to move one of them, and they whatever. So what happened was in that dispersal draft in 72, the Bucks picked him 12th overall. I don't know why he lasted till 12th overall, but he signed with the Hawks. I guess he'd already been working on a deal with the Hawks when he was trying to get out of the ABA. And because he was locked in a salary dispute with the Squires at the time, his agent, Steve Arnold, tried to convince him to sign with a below market contract. And then he discovered that Steve Arnold was also employed by the Squires. That's only a big, giant conflict of interest. So through that dispute, that was voided. And then after one preseason game or two, maybe with the Hawks ended up getting fined. He wanted to stay there. And of course, Gervin briefly was a Hawk as well, and Maravich. So a judge issued an injunction which prohibited him from playing with them. He was returned forcibly to the Squires for one more year, right? And then the cash-strapped Squires were. They say cash-strapped Squire. So, yes, they didn't make a lot of money, but they say that it was because of money they sold him to the Nets. I have on good authority from people who worked for the Squires in those days that the actual ABA forced that deal so they could have their biggest star play in a major media market, right? A larger media market. And then eventually, after the ABA's final championship, which he won, right, when he was with the Nets, defeating the Nuggets. And he was tremendous. Oh, my God, he was so good. He had a ludicrous year. I won't get into the year he had, but it was crazy. And then once they folded, they brought over the Nets, the Nuggets, the Pacers, and Spurs. So that's how he comes into the NBA for real, even though he briefly was a couple of preseason games with the Atlanta Hawks. So I had to look it up because I remember there's some weird thing about him. But, yeah, that's how it happened. So that's how he ended up in the NBA. But yes, I mean, certainly Dr. J should be mentioned anytime that you talk about the 76ers, anything about the 76ers. And yeah, I mean, they've had some other really good free agents. But yeah, Moses Malone would certainly be up there just because he gave them something that they had been missing prior to that. And obviously, so did Dr. J. I mean, Andrew Toney, and that was a really well put together team. Bobby Jones, and people forget how good some of those players were on that team, and
that's why I had to look it up, and I'm like, you might be right, Moses. When you add Moses to that mix,
yeah, I mean, it's an interesting bunch, and I certainly think that he's up there, but yeah, I mean, they've had some big time free agent signings, so it's not like he's by himself. No, they've had some good ones. Even McGinnis, right? I think they got McGinnis from the Pacers, if I remember correctly. Though he wasn't quite as impactful as Dr. J, but yes, sir.
Let's talk a little college football here.
Yes, let's.
Of course, the college poll came out this week, but sources say that the college football playoffs is mulling taking football out of the NCAA. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, this is something, once again, it's been being talked about for 30-ish years, for quite some time. That's conceivably they could someday see, them moving on from, what do you call it? Being a part of the NCAA and becoming their own thing, like a separate thing unto themselves. And I mean, that could happen. That's a thing that could legitimately happen. Here's what would have to happen. So let's say the top, I don't know, 60, 50, whatever it is, teams decide they're going to incorporate as some separate college football consortium where, whatever number of them, top 60, top whatever it is, break into, I don't know, 4, super conferences where they play, each other, and, maybe one, warm-up game early in the season from outside of their super group, and they have their own playoffs, they have their own everything, right? That's separate from the NCAA. Could that happen? Sure. I mean, I'm agreeing that it could happen. But I think the one thing that they don't feel like doing is necessarily reinventing the wheel when, they have a pretty good wheel that's already built. So could it happen? Yes. And might it even happen someday? It certainly could. I just am of the mind that as long as the NCAA doesn't get in their way too much, and increasingly they're getting in their way less and less, James, I think that makes it less and less likely, because it's work creating a whole new thing and then figuring out who gets what and figuring out, how you're going to schedule and all these other things and what regulations will you have. So I wanted to mention a name quite quickly here that I don't want to see people forget. Sort of the Curt Flood of college football was a Northwestern quarterback turned receiver named Kane Coulter. Remember him, James?
Kane Coulter.
Remember Kane Coulter?
Name sounds familiar. I can't say.
He was the one that tried to unionize.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah.
The NCAA football player. The appellate court ruled against him. He wasn't able to get this unionization thing off the ground. But you look now at what they're proposing with this, super group, whatever. I don't know what they're going to call themselves. But what they're proposing is one of the things with what the player's status would be is incredibly similar, eerily similar to what Kane Coulter was proposing. I don't know, might not even 15 years ago. I'd have to look it up, but I think somewhere a little less than 15 years ago. He was proposing a lot of those things.
Well, I'm sure, he would be surprised to see this NIL agreement, because that was, I guess you would want to call all of those movements like the forerunners. But, I've been thinking of what's been happening, and we've been talking about all these super conferences, and how we might only eventually get down to 4 or 5 big conferences. And then I look at what used to be Division II, 1AA, and
Well, no, it wasn't Division II. It was Division II was a separate division. It was one AA, which became the FCS, but that wasn't Division
right.
II.
Okay, well, the what, FCS, Division II, Division III,
And NAIA. Yep.
And then the HBCU. When you look at the total picture, how what effect do you think that these super conferences are going to have upon the pool of these other schools have to? In other words, are we going to see an extinction of these smaller, less financially feasible entities in football?
Well, I think you'll see some sort of arrangement or linkage. And one last thing, I've been thinking about this earlier. So technically speaking, he wasn't a free agent because they purchased him, like literally bought his contract. Is how he became a 76er. They bought him.
You're
They
talking about Dr. J?
from the right. That's how they got him. They bought him from the Nets. And technically speaking, it's not a free agent signing. So George McGinnis was, who I mentioned earlier, was a free agent signing. And they drafted
Moses.
And they drafted Moses, right? In answer to the earlier question. But I mean, the way that things are, the way that things have been, could be, should be, are not always the same answer. But as it is now, here's the other thing. I don't know if you don't have this on the rundown, but I should bring it up. So the first NIL consortium to be formed, NIL collective, whatever you want to use, to be formed at the FCS level has been formed. And it'll be for Montana State University. It will not be the last one, though. I promise you that, James. So you're going to see at the FCS level, NIL, collectives, consortiums, whatever term you want to use, like you've seen, at the FBS level. So that's coming. But yes, my issue has been with the HBCUs not prioritizing winning an FCS championship. The first FCS championship, in fact, was won by Florida A&M, right? Was won by an HBCU under Jake Gaither. That's the last time an HBCU has even come particularly close to winning the FCS championship. It's because they prioritize playing in these moneymakers, right? The classics and things like that, which are money winners while sometimes traveling. Let's say you're going to, North Dakota or Texas, or you're going to, Villanova up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. You're paying the travel cost. You're not getting concessions, right? That's going to the home team. You're not getting the parking. You're not getting all that stuff. You're getting a sliver of a very small television contract that FCS teams get for their games and their championship games. It's a very small contract. You're splitting it however many different ways. So you're not getting gate receipts. I mean, you know what I mean? So it's a money loser, quite frankly. Going and competing in the FCS championship is a money loser. And these HBCUs are cash strapped. They don't have a lot of extra money to throw around, James. So they've prioritized these money-making games, the This Classic, the Orange Blossom Classic, the, Bayou Classic, the whatever Classic, the Battle of the Bays in the case of, Hampton and Norfolk State. So because of that, if kids who want to play, and of course it maybe doesn't matter to some of them, but want to play in the postseason in the FCS, are going to think twice about going to an HBCU, some of them at least, because you don't really get that opportunity.
So do you see a decline in the quality of football that we see in these conferences?
No, I think it's actually on the upswing because of the freedom of movement due to transfer regulations having been loosened up. I mean, look at that Jackson State team that Deion's put together. It's loaded, James.
Yeah, but once again, that's Deion. I mean, when you look at, even though Tennessee State has Eddie George, you haven't heard any real.
Grambling has Hugh Jackson.
Yeah, I mean, you haven't heard of any, major signings like Deion has had. I mean, there are going to be exceptions to the rules, and there are, of course, certain celebrities, and there are guys, that realize that they're not going to have pro careers afterwards. So, hey, I played for Eddie George, or it's something to put on your resume or your personal history. But is it going to make a difference? I mean, even though the HBCUs have had success, considering to the relative numbers that that they do put in, the next level of football. You know, how much is that pool going to be? Shrinking?
Well, okay, by pool you mean the talent pool?
Yes.
Well, like I said, I don't think that's true. If
I mean, don't I mean, right now, you have what, 100 players for Ohio State. Maybe another 75 or 80 out here for USC. If those conferences expand, maybe you're going to have another 5 or 10 players to each team.
Sure. But with players now not being willing to wait 2 years to play, James, there's still going to be plenty of those guys transferring. And I guess one of the reasons you see the celebrity coaching hire mania in the HBCU level is it's a chance for them to get some of those kids when they start transferring, because you've got name recognition. Oh, I know who Deion Sanders is. Oh, I know who Eddie George is. Oh, right. I mean, they probably know who Hugh Jackson is. They may not have the same esteem or feelings regarding the other two they do with a guy like Hugh Jackson. But either way, it's name recognition. That's part of why these guys got hired, James, is because you're trying to compete not just with high school recruitment, because that's important and it certainly helps. But if you can get some impact transfers, guys who know the game, are more built up physically and ready to go, that can help you to compete immediately.
But on the other hand, I'm just throwing some names out here. But say if I got Jimbo Fisher and the coach of Miami, wanting to
Manny
come and
Diaz.
see me, yeah, and then Hugh Jackson, uh, I think that stacks up like 1, 2, 3. Not one, maybe 2, 3, but 1, 2, 3. And not saying that, I mean, the kid might be a better fit on for his aspirations on that number 3 team. But once again, if I got a chance to go to a prestigious school, and even would I rather be number 28 on Hampton State or number 105 for OSU?
Right. I mean, here's the thing. It's always been a struggle. Well, not even a struggle. It's always been a challenge when you're recruiting to a school that's only on television a handful of times a year. Now, what's happening is Jackson State, particularly, but some of those schools are getting them on television more than they used to. But they've always put guys in the NFL, right? And so that helps. You can say, oh, well, so and so went here, and so went here, and so went here. You add to that if indeed there is some sort of realignment, all the stuff we talked about earlier, where there's these vast changes, it'll open up, obviously, with that top tier goes off on its own, that opens up, the ones that are still at the NCAA level, maybe to fill some of those gaps that were made by those that sort of climbed in the, I don't know, spaceship or whatever it is that those teams that supposedly are leaving the NCAA are going to leave in, because you still have to, have a budget. I mean, there's a bunch of things that go into, building that a new, whatever they end up calling it, like I said, consortium or bear or whatever they're building. Build a bear.
Will you think Notre Dame will have double-digit wins this year?
They certainly could. I will not go so far as they will, but I think that once again, like so many teams, if they can stay healthy, which I haven't seen them do in a while, and more importantly, get some real growth, because offensive line has usually been a strength of them traditionally. Their last year's was not special to me. I wasn't blown away by the tape. So the question is, can they get back to being really dominant up front on both sides of the line?
I was going to ask Spencer this question, but Spencer's kind of right now he's working with a couple of apprentices in his restoration business. But uh, Saban and Jimbo Fisher, the Bulldogs seem to be rebuilding, and Bama starts the season at number one. But is the SEC as strong as it used to be? Uh, are we thinking? I mean, there's talk Alabama. I mean, excuse me, Ohio State's getting stronger, may be able to compete with Alabama for that spot. We see Clemson back in some cases, number three or number four. What do you think? Is the SEC as dominant as it used to, as it was in the past couple seasons?
Okay. I mean, even a down season with the SEC is still a pretty good season, James.
Yeah,
I will say, I think the SEC will maybe a little bit down, but not in the middle or even on the back end. I think that whoever wins will not be as good a team as Georgia was this past season, but they're good enough to win because they're the best team still.
Are we going to see the dominance? Uh, Last year, a lot of you guys were talking about the dominance of that Georgia defense, and the Alabama defense wasn't that far behind. But has Alabama taken a step back defensively?
I mean, I think Alabama has a chance to be better, in fact, this year than last year at a few different positions. Now, obviously, Will Anderson's still Will Anderson. Everyone's presumptive number one overall. Assuming that their quarterback gets a little physically stronger, he doesn't have to do a lot. He's pretty much there. Just needs to put on a little bit of muscle. Alabama's going to be fine. I mean, I don't know how best you say to someone, no, turn the page. Like Alabama will be Alabama this year, next year, the year after that. I don't see any time in the foreseeable future them ceasing to be an elite program that churns out great players.
No, Saban is one of those guys. Like recruits are going to be drawn to regardless. So it doesn't really, uh, you know, Alabama, one of those programs that speaks for itself, and the SEC. Hey, I mean, that's kind of prestigious in itself, playing for an SEC team. But I want to get to one of your favorite subjects, and I'm going to kind of put this in two parts because we do have a class finalists, and so far it's Chuck Holly, Joe Klecko, and Lincoln Riley. They're named, excuse me, Ken Riley. They're all named Hall of Fame finalists. Your thoughts on the name of these finalists? And number two, who are you most disappointed that didn't make this class? Did I lose Bill?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, can you repeat the question?
I was talking about the finalists for the Hall of Fame.
Oh, right. Yes. So I
Klecko and Holly and
and Kenny
Ken.
Riley.
Yeah. And I was
So
asking, what were your thoughts on the class? And then who are you most disappointed that didn't make this class?
yep. So I mean it's a solid class. All those guys should have been in already. Howley should have been in 2 decades ago. Kenny Riley should have been in probably close to that, by at least a good 10 years ago. And you could say probably the same about Klecko. But I'm very disappointed that Billy Houghton, right, the guy who retired with 2 legs of the receiving Triple Crown, and despite that he played on teams that were not great at throwing the football, James, he's drafted in 54 by the Green Bay Packers, sets records that still stand. He has set a rookie record. So the rookie record for receiving yards in a game is not Sterling Sharp, right? It's not Donald Driver. It's not, name whoever you want to name. No, it's still Billy Houghton. So Billy Houghton gets moved when Lombardi comes in. because he's not a great blocker, right? Terrific receiver, but not a great blocker. And Lombardi, for those Packer sweeps to win, needs guys who can go out there and crack even on bigger guys. So he moves him. And, Houghton goes to the Browns. And then I think he finishes up with the Cowboys toward the end of his career. But he managed to produce whoever the quarterback was, whatever the offense was, produced. And he was very fast, actually. He was a 110 high hurdles champion in college and in high school. But yeah, he should be in the Hall of Fame. And Roger Brown, right? One of the anchors, right? He played the nose in two of the great fearsome foursomes. The first one in Detroit, I wish our friend was here, but I understand he's dealing with his wife's situation. But back to what I was saying. So in in Detroit, he's part of that first great fearsome foursome with Darius McCord, Sam Williams, and Alex Karras. And then towards the end of his career, the Rams come calling because Rosie Greer had torn his Achilles, which led him to getting involved in a bunch of other stuff, right? That's why he starts working for the Robert Francis Kennedy campaigns, because he's trying to rehab from the injury. Then at some point he realizes it's not going to happen. But he comes in and replaces Rosie Greer and is a better pass rusher. I don't know if he's a better all-around player, but definitely a better pass rusher. So just to put it in perspective, at the time of his retirement, and of course, sacks were not an official statistic, but Roger Brown retired with 79.5 sacks, and he wasn't playing three technique, James. He was a nose, right? He was a nose with 79.5 sacks. He's not in the Hall of Fame. Bothers me to no end. Drives me nuts. I mean, there's other guys I could name, but those two really stand out. I could throw Ken Anderson in there too, but those two particularly stand out to me. That Roger Brown isn't in, and the same can be said, of Billy Houghton. Disappointing.
Yeah.
I'll mention to Tommy Nobis.
That Tommy Novus, I don't know why I was under the assumption that he was already in the Hall of Fame.
Because he should be. Right. We all do that. We put people in the Hall of Fame, and then when I tell them they're not in the Hall of Fame, they're like, what? Nope. Disappointing. I mean, it took Alex Karras forever. Once again, he died, waiting to get in. It shouldn't happen. Too many of these guys. I mean, Roger Brown died waiting to get in. It shouldn't happen. Those guys should have been in.
Yeah, most definitely. Bill, breaking news, Deshaun and the NFL have reached an agreement, Deshaun Watson, that is. He's now going to serve a 11-game suspension, and he's going to pay a $5 million fine. What were your thoughts when you found out that there wasn't going to be another hearing, and what were your thoughts on this final settlement?
Sure. Well, once again, I think we discussed quite a bit. I mean, here's the mark of a great compromise, James, when no one is happy, right? That's how you know you've nailed it, when nobody's happy. The people who wanted him to get really get the hammer dropped on him aren't happy. Watson and his supporters aren't happy. But Watson and his team realizes this is as good as it gets. Yes, let's sign this thing and move on. And it's funny to hear the statements he's putting out and the things the Haslams are saying in press conferences and things like that. It's a mess, and it won't stop being a mess for a while. But I think, I mean, would I have dialed up the punishment another couple of notches? Sure, I would have. But this is essentially, a bigger hit than Roethlisberger, than a bunch of other people got. So there's that.
But Bill, he got what, 280? How many million guaranteed? And a $500 million fine is kind of like a slap on the wrist.
Sure. Well, I mean,
I understand it's the highest fine, but when you compare that to the grievousness of what he did. I look upon this as almost you say neither parties are satisfied, but I think he should be more than satisfied.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that. Uh, for me, like I said, the crux of this thing came down to when the avalanche of names kept hitting the, the NFL during their investigation. They said, okay, this guy may be guilty, may not be guilty, but man, this looks awful. This looks terrible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, when the Texans organization pays off what 30 claims itself or settlements, I mean, that's definitely uh, what for them so-called empowering him. So like I said, I think he got away very, very lucky in this situation, and I mean, uh, especially in this modern era, where you have so many rights groups, this that I think that he got away lucky, and uh, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't think that the Browns could have asked for anything better. So at least he will get to play this season. The last 6 games, and I mean, he hasn't played in what 2 years.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
So I mean, how much of Deshaun are we going to see this year? We might see Deshaun next year, but in 6 or 7 games, we're not going to see the Deshaun that we used to seeing. So, you know, but all in all, the only get away with a $5 million fine and 11 games. I think he got away as best he could. Uh, Bill, AB says he wants to be a cowboy. Should Jerry make that call?
I mean, did he specify football, or he's just talking about he wants to be a cowboy? Like when I was 5, right? Astronaut, cowboy, doctor. I mean, people want things, James, right? People want things, right? It's okay to want things. It is fine to want things. I wish him all the best in his future endeavors. He is not getting a call from Jerry Jones. Jerry Jones might, maybe if one of the starters at wide receiver gets injured, Jerry Jones might threaten to do it, and then somebody will take his cell phone from him or something. They will make sure he doesn't do anything silly like that.
Oh, so oh, I don't know. If Gallup doesn't get wetter soon, the Cowboys are going to be looking for somebody.
Right.
You think say Saquon will be a member of the 1,000 yard rushing club this year? Talking about Saquon Barkley, the Giants.
Yeah. I mean, I think Saquon will have a bounce back year. I'm projecting about 12,000 and 48 yards rushing.
12,000.
Oh, sorry, 12,000. That would be a good 1,248 yards. 1,248 yards rushing. And probably about
That was one of my mistakes, Bill.
yeah, it was. And probably about half that number, or a little less than half that number in receiving yards, probably about 580-ish yards in receiving, so probably right around 1,800 yards in scrimmage yards between rushing and passing. So, yes, I think it's going to be a bounce back season.
And do you think that a lot of people were still, now that the Browns have kind of officially gotten out of the Jimmy G sweepstakes, uh, do you think that the Giants might be the logical landing spot for Jimmy G right now?
Huh. That's a great question, but probably not. Not if it means not getting all the money you can get. If we We know nothing else. We know that generally the league and its participants find a way to squeeze every last dollar, every last dime, every last penny out of their operation.
Huh. Okay. Chicago's looks like they're having a decent game here against the Seahawks. 24-0. Seahawks are tanking even in the preseason, huh? But that's another interesting situation, that we didn't see Baker Mayfield end up there. But do you really think that that the Seahawks are going to ride with Luck and uh, who's the other guy? I mean, Locke.
Yeah, Luck, right? They wish they could ride with Luck. That would be a very easy decision for them. But I mean, will they bring in say a veteran gets cut? Might they bring him in and kick the tires on him? Sure. But Geno Smith is their starter. Luck is the backup. Now you got me doing it. Luck. But yes, Drew Lock is the backup. Right, a former AAU teammate of Michael Porter Jr. when he was an AAU basketball player, very good point guard back in the day. But Locke is and they're hoping maybe somebody will make a play for him because he's young and inexpensive. They're hoping somebody might say, "Hey, we'll take him and deal him for something." But either way, they've got a guy who's got a solid amount of experience and has played well, and then they've got Drew Lock.
Yeah. Kind of staying in the NFC here. What do you think about AJ Brown and how much impact will he have on the Eagles' offense?
So the way this team is attacking this season, I mean, frankly, yeah, sure, anything can happen. We all heard that, right? Anything can happen, any given Sunday, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not going to say it's not possible. I'm not going to say that they can't, put together a solid, above average, very good even run. But there is a limit to what you can expect in their situation. There's a cap, restriction. I mean, pick a way to put it, that will at some point keep them from getting to a certain level. First of all, just look at the kind of talent, the amount of talent some of these teams can throw out there. It separates, right? There's tiers, or pick a term how you want it. Some of them are higher than others. You asked about Saquon. You asked about, was AJ Brown the other one you asked about? Who's the other one?
Yeah, AJ Brown's the one that we're talking about now.
Yeah. So
and his impact on the Eagles' offense.
So it's going to be twofold. He's going to help Hurts, right, just by giving them a bigger target, who's also still really fast and can play, in a couple of different spots. He can play Z, can play, can play in the slot. He can play, X. He's pretty good downfield blocker too, if that matters. But I think that he's going to really help Devontae to develop, give him opportunities, because he won't be seeing number one corners anymore. So, yes, I think it's going to have a pretty serious impact on the team.
Now, also, looking at that division, and, we've always talked about, the amount of injuries. There's always been, injuries that stopped the Cowboys, injuries to the Giants, the offensive line, or whatever. But when I look at the starting quarterbacks for this division, that seems to be. I mean, I know it's a very fragile position, but this division seems to be one of the ones that are least um, um, equipped to lose their starting quarterback. what's your thoughts on the quality of the backups in the NFC East?
Well, no team is equipped to lose their starting quarterback, but there are a few where it's not, it doesn't mean their season over, right? If you have Tyrod Taylor, there's a few guys who are in that top tier of backups. And if you have them, it's not ideal, obviously, but it means you can stay afloat until your starter comes back. That's what the top relievers do. If for some reason you've got to start a couple of games, when the starter comes back, the house hasn't burned down. So that's what I will say. I think that, for this situation, and you mentioned Trey Lance also?
That's our next question.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Okay, so backup quarterbacks are not important until they are, James. Right? Right? They're not important at all until they are. And most teams do not have one they like. Let's be 100% honest. I would say probably 2/3, maybe more than 2/3 of the teams in the NFL, they are not loving their backup quarterback situation. There's, I would say, a small number that are, but they are a small number.
Well, I mean that would it would kind of make a little sense of kind of like Darnold and Baker, who wants to lose their job to a guy that's just coming in. But speaking of Trey Lance is predicted to be among the NFL's top breakout players this season. What's your thoughts on that for a guy that had very limited football play at was it South Dakota State?
No, the opposite. North Dakota State.
North Dakota
State's the Jackrabbits, and of course they gave us, amongst others, Adam Vinatieri. But right. North Dakota State is the unstoppable killing machine.
A lot of back in the day, a lot of those teams used to play Youngstown State. I'm not sure if they still do or not.
But, they do in the playoffs. Yeah, I mean, so Youngstown State. So in the Missouri Valley Football Conference, you've got, well, obviously North Dakota State, South Dakota. You've got South Dakota State. Montana State's in the Big Sky. Scratch that. Montana State's in the Big Sky. You've got Illinois State. You've got Northern Illinois. You've got Northern Iowa. Sorry, Northern Illinois is in the MAC. Northern Iowa. You've got, who am I forgetting? Southeastern Illinois. Southern Illinois. Sorry, the Saluki, Southern Illinois. Illinois State. Who have I left out? That might be it. Or I've forgotten somebody. But either way, it's a really good conference. A bunch of the teams are good. And that's part of why, they're so good too, is because they play such a high level of competition week in and week out, particularly in conference. And they play usually a pretty tough non-conference schedule, including sometimes Big Ten teams and sometimes beating those Big Ten teams as they beat Minnesota a few years back. But yes, I mean, they are a tremendous juggernaut of a program. They have every chance to continue being a tremendous juggernaut of a program. Kids from all over.
But have we seen enough of a sample of Trey Lance? I mean, we've had a lot of these guys come in, with big credentials, big arms, and some of them turn out to be busts.
Sure. I mean, people forget, what some of these guys were like coming out. Even guys you don't think of as tremendous athletes very often were. I mean, Mark Brunell was a really good athlete coming out, right? And he had a good arm, left-hander, but Cutler, right? Extremely athletic, had a huge arm coming out. David Carr, and I do mean David Carr, was a tremendous athlete coming out, had a huge arm. And some West Coast NFL scouts were comparing him to John Elway coming out. I don't think his arm was quite as strong as Elway's, but he had a very strong arm. So Trey Lance has a lot of the measurables, right? A lot of the tangibles, and he's just learning the game. And that may take a little while. So they're going to need to try to find ways to, grow him as best they can. But they have a good number of professionals on this team. Future professionals.
Oh yeah, if Ayuk is playing up to his potential, you still have Debo. Kettle is still among the top tier, I believe, in tight ends. So I mean, there are some pieces there, and the defense isn't that shabby. So
Nope.
I can definitely see, if I think, if he doesn't have to be spectacular, but if he can be uh, a,
Steady. Right.
if he can be a more gifted Alex Smith, the
Oh yeah, well,
49ers.
I think he's got a little more going for him than that. Yeah. So
As far as being able to game manage. In other words, he doesn't have to put his team, in precarious positions in order for him
sure.
to try to win the game.
Right. No, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
But he's going to make more big plays down the field with his feet and with his arm. He's going to make more big plays with his arm, in both ways than. And Smith was a really good athlete too, right? 4'6", 340 coming out. So people forget what a good athlete Alex Smith was. But he's just more of everything than Alex Smith. More raw, right? Obviously, we talked about, but bigger, stronger, faster, more aggressive, mentally speaking. So he's going to make more mistakes, but he's also going to make more big plays.
Aaron Rodgers publicly called out his young wide receivers the other day. Do you think that this is something that he should have handled in privacy? Maybe I know they had supposedly had a players only meeting, and supposedly he addressed it, but you know he wasn't the one that called the meeting. A lot of people say it was the coaches that called the players only meeting, even though he was the one that seemed to take charge. But you know, uh, does that speak to his characteristics as a leader? He has to feel more empowered. Look at me, and uh, you know you should strive to be me, or I mean, how can he expect these guys to come in and all of a sudden take over for his number one receiver that's now with the Raiders? That doesn't make sense to me.
Okay. So are you familiar with something called transference and misdirection?
Of course, yes. All right.
So he's not really calling out his receivers, right? You know who he's really calling out, right? The front office, right? He's really calling out the Packers front office. I mean, I've been studying.
I thought we had got past that point.
Oh, you think so? Is that what you think, James? Oh, James, I have some land to sell you. So I promise you, he's going to be a good soldier and everything. But are you going to get some little cryptic shots all throughout this year? Yes. Or he wouldn't be Aaron Charles Rodgers.
Like I said, I thought when he got with Blue Earth, things might have changed, but
I'm pretty
DeAndre Swift says he wants to become a member of the 1,000-yard rushing and the 1,000-yard receiving club. What do you think about? I mean, I realize that the Lions, Stafford is a good quarterback, and
right, but he plays for the Rams.
I mean,
but
the other guy. The other guy, Mr.
pretty
Golf.
decent quarterback.
But I mean, do you think that Golf and the Lions really have that kind of potential where he could do that?
Well, I mean, Golf throws checkdowns like nobody's business. So, I mean, that it's not impossible. It's unlikely, though, for two reasons. One, their receiver group has improved. They have a better than I think most people know how good are they, the greatest of all time? Are they going to threaten to be? I mean, are they like, Chris Carter, Randy Moss, and Jake Reed? No. But it's a good, young, very affordable group of receivers. And I think they want that. They want to be very good, but affordable at several positions as they backfill and eventually become players in free agency. But, I mean, I'm going to give you some more realistic numbers. I think he might go for, like 1,342 rushing yards. And I could see him going for,
I'd say,
680.
I'd say 600.
680. So he has a really decent shot at like right around 2,000, or maybe just short of 2,000 scrimmage yards. Just not 1,000 of them through receiving. I think that part's unlikely.
Looking at the Giants, I mean at the Lions' schedule, do you think that they're going to win more than 6 games this year?
Oh, they don't have to. I mean, could they? Sure. I don't. Actually, I think the Lions are going to win more than 6. Actually, I think about it. I think they get to 7. I think they're a 7-10 team.
7-10. Okay.
Yep.
I'm sure Demetrius would go along with that. The Chargers make Derwin James the NFL's largest paid safety, at least for now, anyway, with a 4-year, $76.4 million extension, with $42 million of that guaranteed. Do the Chargers have the best D in the AFC West?
Well, I mean, the answer could be yes to both of those things, but Derwin James is an utter and complete beast. I love Derwin James. He's amazing and he's fantastic. And he's worth pretty much whatever you pay him. And
well, at least $42 million guaranteed.
Right. And I'm always glad to see safeties get paid, right? About time. Start paying safeties. The best D in the West. Yes. In fact, they did before this. I mean, they did. I mean, yeah, no, I don't have to think about that one that much. I think the Chiefs will be better on defense than they have been very recently, but that's not saying a tremendous amount. Denver's will continue on to be good. They were good last year. They're good the year before that. They'll continue to be good, but they're getting older at some key spots. And here's the team that I will say I think will be most improved on defense, though, in the AFC West is the Raiders, who were absolutely terrible last year, will not be terrible again this year.
Hey, they have they've always had the offensive weapons, but they're kind of like Minnesota. They can never, they have to outscore you. They can't outplay you. So, Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams both had 203 carries last season for the Broncos. And Gordon says that the Broncos want Javonte to be the guy. Do you think that Javonte can be a 3-down back?
He will be sometimes. I mean, what I will say is that they will both still get plenty of touches. And yes, you would like your young player that you drafted to make your older, more sort of expensive free agent player that you signed unnecessary, right? You would like to get to the point where you can move on from him. But right now, Gordon's too good to move on from him. And I think he has at least another year or so of being too good, maybe 2 of being too good.
So who do you think is going to be the number 1 back for Russell Wilson? Or do you think it's going to be split again like it was last year?
Well, I don't think it'll be a perfect split like last year. That was bizarre. I think that you can drop one guy's production by about, say, 12-ish%, 12 to 13%, somewhere in that range, so maybe instead of 203 carries for Gordon, he gets more like 174 carries. He's still going to get a decent number of touches. He's going to probably average, right around 10 carries and maybe another 2 or 3 receptions. So, yeah, per game. Now it's a 17-game season. So, do that math. Whatever that number is, that's what I think he's going to be about.
Baker will reportedly be named the Panthers starter on week 1 as he starts against his old team, the Clowns. Are you surprised that Baker has gained the upper hand in Carolina so quickly?
No, I think he's kind of a experimental guy to some extent or whatever. I think they're willing to try things. I think they're willing to sort of see what works and let things happen. I think that's what that's about. And then I guess you asked about the Colts also, or is that something we're not doing now?
That's down a little further. We haven't got to the Colts.
Okay. So, Baker's the guy, and I knew Baker would be the guy when they brought him in. If you were really sold on Sam Darnold, you're not bringing in Baker Mayfield. There's only one reason he's there. You didn't bring him there to back up Sam Darnold. And surprise, no. I couldn't be less surprised.
Well, who wins that game, Bill?
The game between
the Panthers and the Browns, week 1.
Oh, okay. Oh, I think that could well be a win for the Panthers. Huh. Well, I didn't see that coming originally. But yeah, I think it could be.
Wouldn't that be ironic?
Yep.
Oh, kind of like a Riddick move there. But let's see. Let's talk a little bit about the Falcons. Even though Mariota's there, Ritter had got some exposure last week.
Yep.
And it seems that he does seem to be prepared, but that is the Falcons. You have Patterson coming over, and you have your tight end Kyle Pitts that's emerging. What do you think about the Falcons? Is this I don't want to say a rebuilding year for them, but what is a successful season for the Falcons, even though it may be a losing record?
Sure. It most likely will be a losing record, but a successful season really is around development of their best young players. One, can they find a legitimate pass rusher? A guy who can get you 8, 9, maybe even double-digit sacks consistently. And, the Falcons have struggled since, I don't know, John Abram? I'm trying to think of the last guy they had who was like a consistent double-digit sack guy year in and year out. It seems like it's been a while.
Quite a while.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I think it's been a minute. So they've got that to do, because if you don't have that guy and the way the game is played nowadays, you're going to wish that you had that guy. Because now you have to blitz. There's a whole bunch of things you have to do when you can't get pass rush home without doing something special. Just trusting the guys you would just have on the field and not having to scheme up pressure. And that's what they had to do in the past, James. They had to scheme up pressure last season. And that will eventually bite you. There's no other way to put that. You can only spin the the chamber, and eventually there's a bullet in one of those chambers if you keep playing Russian roulette, and that's sort of what blitzing is. It's sort of like a game of Russian roulette. So that's the first thing. And of course, obviously, a quarterback, but that's not happening this year. They're going to try to find a young quarterback, and I'm going to assume next year's draft class. Or maybe they like the one they have. I mean, it all depends, right? If Ritter, because they didn't overinvest in Ritter, it won't hurt them too much if they do decide to move on from him. But as you said, he looks good. He's got some. You mentioned Alex Smith. He's got some of those Alex Smith type qualities to him, and of course Mariota. I rather famously called Polynesian Alex Smith. So they've got some similar skill sets and approaches to playing the game. They're going to have to figure out something at running back. So right now, their top two running backs are 30-year-old Cordero Patterson, who was a wide receiver until fairly recently. Mike Davis, who's 28 years old, and I really like him, but once again, another 28-year-old sort of guy who's sort of bounced around. Wayne Gallman and Quadri Allison. They're players. They're legitimate NFL players, but there's nothing there that makes you say, "Oh man, we're set." This is a very tight end friendly offense. They have Hayden Hurst, but at some point they're going to want to upgrade that position, probably through the draft or maybe through free agency. I mean, this team has a lot of guys that they'll be moving on from fairly soon. They like Russell Gage. He's only 25. Kyle Pitts is literally 21 years old. He's a guy you hold on to. Ritter, it's still a question mark, but I think they like what they see. He at least gets a couple more years to show what he is or is not. Darby's just 24.
Gage is gone now, right?
That's right. Gage is gone. You're right. Gage is gone.
Gage is a Buccaneer now.
He's a Buck, right? So right. That shows what I'm talking about. That this roster is going to keep turning over. Like some of these guys are going to continue to leave. So that's not over with. Like there's going to be more guys who find their way somewhere else. But last thing I'm going to say, the two leading sackers on the team were both linebackers. Gets back to what I said about blitzing, right? Folosade Olakun and Deion Jones. And do you want to guess how many sacks they had each? Oh, let me take it back. Dante Fowler was actually the leading sacker. I take it back. Fowler the leading sacker on the team had 4.5 sacks. And they had 18 as a team, James. 18. So there were guys that had more sacks than them, like single dudes, right? Who had more sacks than they had as a team. I'm not gonna say it's impossible to win, but it's extremely difficult to win if you just can't get pressure without blitzing. So
kind of mixing up things once again. You mentioned Russell Gage, and I happen to think that this, as far as fantasy wise, this might be a breakout year for Russell Gage. He's got, of course, Tom, but Goodwin and Evans are both nicked as far at least as of this moment.
Yeah, they're both nothing super serious, but yes, they're both injured.
But but both of them have had a history of not being able to stay healthy during the season. So I think this could be a good move for Russell Gage. What is Russell Gage's fantasy value?
I mean, I think he's a guy that can get you between 830 and 980. Just maybe just a little short of 1,000 this year, depending upon, as you said, the health of those other two. And the biggest thing is earning the trust of one Thomas Edward Patrick Brady Jr. If you aren't in the circle of trust, or whatever term you're going to use, I don't know, whatever term, the trust tree, whatever it is, whatever you want to call it. If
then you throw your uniform and pads on the bench and you walk out, right?
You might as well. You might as well. he will let you know in no uncertain terms that you will never see the football. All you have to do is maybe run a route or two at the wrong depth, or it doesn't take much. He will cut you off and move on to somebody else. So that's a big question mark regarding that. But if he does become one of Brady's favorites, it gives him a chance. I still think he's going to be a 2/3, somewhere in that range. But yes, a longer-term injury to either of those two pushes him up, right, to where he would be able to maybe break the 1,000-yard mark.
Another guy I feel like I have to talk about because I thought that this was going to be who the Steelers picked if they hadn't moved up to pick up Kenny, and that's Malik Willis. We saw a small sample of what he did last week. Of course, he had one rushing touchdown, but part of the criticism, even from his coach and from himself, is that he has too much confidence in his legs rather than his arm. What did you see from Malik in his game last week?
Well,
and what does that spell for Ryan Tannehill? Another guy that seems to have trouble, getting through a full season.
Sure. Well, the big thing is that he still is taking what they call the poor man's check down, right? He still takes off. He's still having trouble locating certain things. He's not seeing defenses quickly. And of course, some teams will dial up, a fair amount of stuff, even in the preseason, but you should be able to keep up with what defenses are doing, generally speaking, in preseason. But, it's taking a while to see it, to identify things, to spot safety rotation, to see if they're coming or cheating, all that stuff, or, all that stuff, the stuff he has to learn. And so there's not enough of him to evaluate at this point, in my opinion. And it's a big year for him, right? The anti-him people, people who are anti him, if he struggles early on, will have more than enough ammunition to get the ball rolling, downhill. And then regarding Sewell, once again, to me, it's just value. Can you get enough back for him that while it won't stop you from, missing what should have been an integral part of the squad, it at least buys you time to find someone, who does have a better situation and aligns with what he wants to do and how he wants to do it.
Now we're going to talk about the Colts because Irsay says that the Colts are set for another generation of greatness. In the division that they play in, Matty Ice if Matty Ice is the savior of your team, I think that you're in a little bit of trouble. I don't, we still have to see what kind of connection there's going to be between Matty and Pittman. And of course, one of the things that always happens to the Colts is they suffer a rash of injuries, especially in the second half of their season. What's your expectations for the Colts?
I think the Colts will be good. I think that while Matt Ryan, he's not quite as steep on his decline train as, say, Ben Roethlisberger was last year. He's definitely lost a little something. And he was never super athletic to begin with. He was never the strongest or the fastest. However, they have one full-on young superstar in Jonathan Taylor and a possible budding, maybe not superstar, but really good receiver in Michael Pittman Jr. And, a bunch of guys at tight end. But if one of them can emerge a little bit, and be more than just a guy, that could be a fairly dangerous route.
Now, the last team I have to talk to you about, of course, are the Steelers. Uh, we've heard a lot of different things coming out of training camp, particularly about Pickett's improvement, the way he handles the team. But I was kind of surprised that uh, he's still listed behind Mason Rudolph. What's your thoughts on that?
About the listing on the depth chart?
Yes.
Well, those things mean nothing at this point, at least. They've just had one cut down. It was only 5 players. This roster, the 53 that you're seeing now, 10% or more either won't be off the team or will be, practice squad or whatever. You won't even see some of these people. But there's just enough going on at training camp. People are coming out of the dead period. They're desperate for things, James. And if somebody did something notable at at training camp, it's going to be everywhere. Not a prison camp, luckily, but at training camp, it's going to be everywhere. People want to talk about it forever.
Well, let's talk about the development of George Pickens. Did
Okay.
you see that coming?
Sure. The question on Pickens wasn't his ability; it was his health. He didn't play a lot because he was hurt. But he's always been, he was a 5-star recruit coming out, James. He's a big-time signee when they got him. Starts his career at USC, transfers to Georgia. Misses almost all of that last season due to injury, but comes back and plays well in limited snaps. Yeah, they're getting a really good one.
And what do you expect from that Pittsburgh defense this year, considering that you got Lamar Jackson, you got Joe Burrow. Right now, Jacoby Brissett is the weak link. But we have Trubinsky or maybe a rookie quarterback starting for us. How good does that defense have to play to keep us in a playoff spot this year, if at all?
Oh, okay. So a lot of the teams we've discussed so far are teams that are, if not, it's once again not impossible. Nothing's impossible because there's going to be some turnover. Some of the teams that were good last year will not be good next year. But I'm going to say probably at least one more year away from being a legitimate contender. That would be my read of it.
And lastly, within talking about some guys that have moved on from our division, of course, Marquise Brown said that he felt that the Ravens didn't value him or had moved on from him. But who now becomes that man for Lamar as far as his downfield threat?
Rashad Bateman. Devin Duvernay is also having a good camp. James Prochet is going to be in the slot. And of course, Mark Andrews is still going to be one of the best receiving tight ends in football. So they should be okay. And they've got some undrafted guys I really like. You've heard me talk about Shamar Bridges, so I'm going to continue to brag on him. He's been really good in camp so far. He's big and he's athletic and very good leaper and has a great sense of where the competition is. So that's another guy to watch out for. All right, I'll give you one more. Now, this guy is technically speaking a tight end, but he'll be playing all over the place, including sometimes in the slot. Is Isaiah Likely from Coastal Carolina. Finds his way, there to the Ravens, and I think is going to really play well for them over time.
A couple quick fantasy questions. Who are some of the rookies that I should target in the later rounds?
Okay. And what was the second part of the question?
No, that was it. I said, who are some of the rookies that I should target in the later rounds?
Oh, I'm going to give you some other, Jalen Tolbert probably isn't in the later rounds anymore. He's probably played his way up a little higher. But yeah, I mean, Pickens. Now, and once again, Dynasty, Pickens is going fairly early, but in redraft, he's a guy that's probably a late round flyer. Khalil
You
Shakir.
can pick up Pickens in most leagues now. If you catch him now, you can pick up Pickens in
Yep.
almost every
Yep.
league.
Khalil Shakir is a late round flyer. I mean, Romeo Dubs has probably played himself higher up, but I got him early. So he's on my my dynasty squad.
Any other guys?
Well, I mean, obviously all the rookie running backs. Not all of them, but I mean, Pierre Strong is probably going to be a reserve this year. But if there's an injury somewhere to that group of Patriots backs, he has a chance to climb up in that fight. Rashad White, I think, has a chance to eventually get a little work done. And obviously, the two top guys, are Walker and Hall. I think Walker's, eventually becomes the he's the number 3 right now, but eventually becomes the number 2. And Breece Hall, similar situation. I think Michael Carter continues to be the number 1, but I think Breece Hall finds his way into the number 2 spot in that running back room fairly quickly. One super late flyer at tight end is John Bates of the Washington Commanders. Due to the injuries to Logan Thomas, there's a chance that he plays a fair amount this year. Who am I leaving out? I mean, I'm trying to think of guys that, aren't going to go early, guys that you might have a chance at later who are likely to produce. I mean, everyone knows about Sky Moore, obviously. Obviously, words out about Pickens. I think Velus Jones is mostly going to be a special teams guy, but he's going to play in some 4 and 5 receiver sets for Chicago.
Okay. There was somebody else I wanted to ask you about. Slips my mind right now, but oh, the tight end for Denver. I can't think of his name right now. Um, I think it begins with an O. I think he's African, Nigerian.
Oh, you mean Albert Ekwanibaum?
Right. What kind of season and fantasy numbers should we expect from him?
It's 5.5. Well, how you're scoring, right? If it's half point PPR, 6 full point PPR, then obviously better. But standard scoring, probably a 6.5 to 5.5 point guy. He may not even hold on to the starting spot. He's got some competition for his position, so it'll be interesting to see how that camp battle and other things sort of shake out for him. But he's certainly in there. He's in the battle, in the fight, in the whatever you want to use. I guess the outlook, in my opinion, is that he's a guy that you might toss in if you've got a bunch of guys out during a bye week or you get ravaged by injury. I think he's going to, now with Fant gone, he's going to get a decent amount of snaps. I think that he'll get a chance to show if he's the guy or not. He got almost a quarter. Now, once again, Cortland Sutton was out pretty much all that year, but he got almost a quarter of the targets in their passing attack last year. So he's going about pick 140, and on average in this year's fantasy drafts. But Greg Dulcich, right? They drafted him. He's looking really good. Dulcich did come up with a abdominal injury, but it's not super serious. Ekwanbaum had 44 catches on his career coming in. I could see him, having more than that this year. But I don't think he's going to be a top, 8 type tight end. More like a top 12 to 14-ish kind of tight end.
The guy that you use if your number one guy is down, more or less.
Yeah.
You don't want him to be your primary tight end, but if he's your backup for 1 week, I think you could live with that. Well, Bill, it looks like it was going to be just us tonight, so it was
It
glad.
does look like it's going to be just us.
But next week we have our fantasy football draft live on the air.
That will be exciting.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to see what happens with you and Mike and Chris, of course. So it's going to be fun to watch how you guys draft. So I'm looking forward to that. Bill, give us your final thoughts for the evening, man. And as always, thank you so much for hanging out with me.
Sure. First, a very sort of somber note, unfortunately. Luke Knox, the younger brother of Dawson Knox, the tight end of the Colts, was found dead early this morning, and he's, I think, 21 or 22 years of age.
22.
22. I knew it was young. I'm not sure of the circumstances. I frankly don't even care what the circumstances were. It's an incredibly sad thing. And, whether it was an accident, whatever it was, should be a reminder to us, one, that as, we've been hearing since we were children, that tomorrow is not promised to us. But also, I hope that it helps to rehumanize in people's eyes who you're watching, right? You're watching a bunch of young men, humans, right? Young humans who are still students, even though there's lots of talk about, whether or not they're students or, at least at this point, they are still students. They're still, going to classical civilization classes and abnormal psychology and marketing 131 and all. They're still doing that stuff. College can be stressful, especially for people for whom there are higher than regular expectations. And once again, I know very little about this young man. I know, once again, like most people, what they read and, what people said in the outpouring of grief and support that has followed this tragic event. But I hope, we've all heard this. It doesn't cost anything to be kind. It doesn't cost anything to treat someone else well. And in fact, it benefits you. It makes you better. It makes your day better. It makes your life better when you help someone or make their life better or uplift them. So, I want each and every one of us to take every advantage that we can to be better, to be the best possible version of ourselves, and to whenever possible, try to help whoever it is that we run across in our daily lives, and sometimes even put yourself sort of in somebody's way, or take advantage of an opportunity should it come your way, to find a way to reach out to someone, to be kind to someone, to maybe make them smile, or whatever you can do. Or sometimes just listen. Sometimes just listen. Sometimes it's all somebody needs is someone to just listen. That's my final thought. And there's other things that sort of came to my mind or I thought about. But that sort of was the thing that ended up sort of pushing everything else out of my mind, I guess you could say, was just the, that, because that's very final. The other thing that sort of popped in my head and this is a name that'll mean something to you. It was also that this today was the day that Tony Conigliaro got beamed by Jack Hamilton in Fenway Park, and he was on his way in many people's eyes to being. I mean, he was being compared to, once again, the usuals, Mantle and Mays and whoever. And unfortunately, the fractured cheekbone, dislocated jaw, and a damaged eye kept him out of the game for a year and a half. And when we returned, he wasn't the same guy. But, the one thing that also did come out of that was batting helmets became much more accepted and common and improved, hopefully helping to prevent some of those things from occurring. So I guess you got sort of two of them for twice a one.
Yeah, like you said, sometimes all you need is somebody to listen. Especially if you have a veteran or somebody that you might might be depressed. Sometimes all they need is just someone to talk to, someone to just listen, not judge, just listen. So, hey, have a great night, Bill. I'll
Yep.
see you next week. Looking
Same to
forward
you,
to the
sir.
draft next week.
Yes, indeed.
Have a great night, everyone. We'll see you next Thursday right here on
Next
the
Thursday.
Sports Crib. Uh,
Oh, and Demetrius, thinking about you and your family, sir.
yes, yes. I haven't heard a lot of the whole story, but Demetrius is always in our prayers. So, uh, any of our listening audience, please send out your thoughts and prayers to Demetrius and his family, and we look forward to having Demetrius back soon, and hopefully everything will work itself out. Have a great night, everyone. Look forward to talking to you next week.